Welcome, everybody. I'm so excited to bring you guys into Goldenlight Academy today. And this is a really special episode. By the time you see this, I'll be in Sacramento. And so we worked to record it in advance so that we had a really great conversation for you guys. I want to talk about what's happening this week for us and in this time for us, and to really give you guys some inspiration as leaders, as people of color, as Black leaders in America. And I have a really phenomenal and a budding leader in the community that we're going to talk to in a second. But let me tell you what's been going on with me. Now, this week, I have spent my time with the late, great Manning Marable, and I went back to Malcolm X, A Life of Reinvention. Those of you guys who've known me for a long time, you know Malcolm X is my guy. That is my main man and somebody who I've literally studied his journey. I remember when Manning first wrote this book and how revolutionary it was, because just like Ig's King book, Manning was able to capture this incredible light and this incredible leader in our communities a little bit different. And he was able to talk about some of the specific things that Malcolm experienced when he was Detroit Red back in the day, but also as he moved into the Nation of Islam, as he moved into the public spotlight, as he became an advocate for people of color, for Black communities, for leaders all over the world. And so I think if I were to give you guys a piece of advice, don't feel like because you've read a text once that you've really absorbed it. You know, I read this book maybe 10 years ago, I think, at this point, and I still find relevance in what the great Malcolm was doing. And every time I read this text, I find something new, something different, something that I can apply to my life. This time around, I've seen a lot more of my journey in his journey, particularly in speaking the truth. And, you know, that's how I end up getting in situations, is because I have a really hard time not telling the truth. And so that's what we want to do today. But I also want to leave space for you all to have your own journeys and understanding what it means to be a leader in this day and age. What's needed from leaders? How do we actually protect ourselves so that we can lead our people? One of the things Malcolm wasn't able to do so well was really protect his mental health and himself. And just like King, Malcolm ended up in the hospital for exhaustion. He lost a lot of weight. People were worried about him. He was eating one meal a day and he was pouring 20 hours a day into the struggle for freedom. And while that's noble, today health is wealth, rest is resistance, and we want to make sure that we can last and survive. And so I was listening to Public Enemy, and you guys know I'm a hip hop head from back in the day. I'm still a millennial after all this time. And one of the things that, shout out to Flavor Flav and his clock, and shout out to the hidden message that it's time to wake up. But one of the things that I love about Fight the Power in particular is that it was so aggressive in being able to tell us that, hey, there's some stuff happening that you may not be aware of, and I'm going to put voice to that. I'm going to make sure that you guys understand that. And I really appreciate the guys of Public Enemy for really tempering this conversation for me and allowing me to see that regardless of what my role is as a leader or where I'm working or what I'm doing, that there is a structure that my presence in is now dismantling, or it's fighting, or it's healing. And that's something that I think is a unique and universal truth for many of us. And so I'm really excited today to get into this conversation. If you're a leader of color in corporate America, I need you to hear this. Your presence is powerful, but it does come at a cost. And today we're going to talk about that cost. I'll be back in a second. See you in a second. All right, now listen, I have a guest today that I'm very excited to talk to for many reasons. This is actually somebody who I'm very close to his father. I consider his father like a brother of mine. He's like a mentor to me and in life. And even though I was his boss, he has really taught me a lot about survival and resilience as a Black man in this space, and has literally lifted me up at times where I wanted to throw in the towel on being a corporate leader. And what's exciting about Kahlil is his ability to recontextualize his roles and the work that he does as a corporate leader to really shine light on how we live our lives, to really show that part of leadership is the way that we decide to lead and the way that we decide to approach corporate spaces. And so Kahlil was born and raised in LA. Shout out to Kendrick Lamar. And he built his career in public relations, working with brands like MAC Cosmetics, J.C. Penney, Remy Martin, and Coach. And he's had over a decade in public relations, which has shaped his experience in storytelling, in brand positioning. As the senior brand manager at Target, he successfully launched a new fashion brand, surpassing sales and consumer engagement goals. So we're not just talking about somebody who is just out here cosplaying a leader. This is somebody who's actually making a change in the industry. Kahlil earned his MBA from NYU Stern in 2023, bringing global business insights into his work. And he's dedicated to empowering and advancing companies led by underrepresented individuals. So, ladies and gentlemen, I want y'all to get y'all virtual hand claps together. And even though we're not there live today, as you watch this, I know that this is going to be an impactful episode for you. So, ladies and gentlemen, Kahlil Spurlock,
Thank
we're
you.
giving you the virtual hand clap.
Thank you.
We
Thank
got the
you.
graduation photo up.
I love it.
We see the hat. We see the hoodie. We're really excited to have you on Goldenlite Academy today. And welcome, welcome, welcome. It's so great to have you on here.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. And yes, you already called it out, but I got my Telfar hat on. I got my Daily Paper sweater on as I talk about, supporting Black-owned brands, and I really am about it. And I'm also excited to talk about that in part of our conversation today, too.
Yeah, I'm really excited. And this is how I open up with everybody, because for some people who watch this, they're going to know who you are. And then there's going to be a lot of people who do watch this who are like, who's this guy up here? And, what is he doing here? So my big question is, who are you? What makes you unique? How do you show up in this world? Who are you?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say I would like to describe myself as a passionate and empathetic creative brand marketing and cultural strategist who wants to impact the world through my work, beliefs, and partnerships. So, as you mentioned, I'm born and raised in Los Angeles, and specifically the San Fernando Valley. And to be honest, that did shape the way that I think and behave. Um, I would say I grew up at a time when I was very, very young and I saw the romanticized view of Los Angeles. That's exactly what I wanted. I loved it. I loved the palm trees. I loved the big wide streets. I loved the car culture, the celebrities, all of it. And this was also the time where there was a lot of radicalized, racial focused news happening, like O.J. Simpson, Rodney King. Um, And so just to, I guess, think of those two things at the same time, right? Like growing up in LA at that time, and we're also talking about NWA, and all, you brought up Public Enemy, so I have to bring up NWA, right? Like all of that
Right.
was happening at the same time. And I'm going to be honest, I think it was a benefit to grow up in LA at that time. I can't speak for anyone else, but for me, I definitely think it was maybe something that I cherish and I definitely take with me. And then after that, I grew into my teens. And honestly, as I saw New York, I was like, I want that. The passion, the love that people had for that city specifically, I was like, that is something that I want to be in. And what I found really unique about the city is frankly how much money it had. I was like, it just seemed like there was so much ambition in that city. And to be honest, I'm not sure if my love for the city happened before or after 9/11, but I knew at some point in my teens that I wanted to move to New York at some point. So all that to say, I graduated from high school in 2007, which was probably the height of the global recession, as it was called, right? And I saw a lot of things changing, and economically, fundamentally, um, and that and tied with my just personal stuff going on, like my mom and the aunt who was living with us at home was just going or getting out of cancer treatment. My father was like in between jobs at the time. So like I wanted and I knew that I had to be very intentional with where I was going in life after that. And so I decided to stay local. I started at Pierce. I went to CSUN, which I know is also your alma mater as well. Um,
Shout out to all the Matadors.
yes, shout out to all the Matadors. And I actually decided to major in marketing and then minor in Pan African Studies. And there was two reasons why I'm minored in Pan African Studies.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
Yes,
You know,
yes,
so the Pan African Studies, that was my first major. And when you were graduating high school, I was graduating with that degree,
yes,
and I'm actually writing about some pieces of that experience right now. So I love hearing that. Shout out to the PAS department. It's now the Africana Studies department at Cal State Northridge.
yes,
Very famous in the world of education and politics. So there you go. You went from NWA, you went from Rodney King, and then you went into another
yes, yes,
institution that is famous
yes.
in the
Yes.
world for activism.
Honestly, it's what's so unique and interesting about that is because I was also doing marketing at the same time, right? So like as you kind of talked about this idea of how we as leaders and professionals show up, how are we bringing our authentic selves into work, right? And that has always been very important to me. So the reason why I actually chose Pan African Studies, actually, there's two reasons. One is, yes, I wanted to do something that connected to me, my history, and people who look like me, identified like me. And frankly, the other reason is I needed to declare a minor because they were cutting classes at this time. This is a time like the
Mm,
budget cuts were happening. So I was like, I need to figure something else out. And how can I make these two things work within each other? Um, and so after
love
that,
this.
I started my internship at this PR firm in West Hollywood. And if you ask anyone who's worked in Hollywood, they'll probably say they worked at the height of Hollywood, which is kind of true, right? Like Hollywood has always been this big, glamorous, impactful thing since it began. But I will tell you, when
Yes.
I started in PR in 2011, man, I was working at like the height of reality TV and all of this stuff. So like it was definitely an experience. Um, and I will say I was always like working with some A, B, or even C list celebrity and trying to tie that back to the brands that I was working with to make them impactful. And I continued doing that. And then I moved on to another firm. And then after working 2 years at that firm, I got laid off. And then I was like, okay, so this is the time I need to move to New York. I moved to New York. And honestly, New York was everything that they told me it was. It was something out of the movies. Like it was crazy. Like, so for example, when I would walk down the street, and mind you, I'd only been to New York maybe 3 or 2 times before this, but when I would walk down the street, and see these large buildings and everything, it felt like something on the Universal Studios backlot. Like that was my closest proxy, right? I was like, this looks like it's fake.
Yeah.
And then also, like even just commuting, like this idea of like not even being in cars like that, like people using public transportation, like it was just, and yes, I would ride the bus and all that stuff, and take the subway in LA, but not often. And frankly, the subways aren't even that connected. Our public transit in LA is not that well connected. And so that was,
Oh, we know.
yeah,
I'll be
I
on the
know.
red line and the blue line.
Yes,
I used to ride in, but I had a car, then I sold it, and I was like, I'm gonna ride the trains
yeah,
everywhere and save some money.
yeah.
And then I was like, no, my Uber bills went up, so I definitely know.
Well, actually, funny on that note is when I was in high school, so for everyone too, I went to Cleveland High, which I studied, or the magnet program was humanities. So we learned a lot about race and gender and just social economic politics, all that. There was an outside group who would come to the school quite often, and they were called the Bus Riders Union. And so,
Interesting.
yes, and actually, I wasn't really a member. It was a friend of mine, and via proxy, I would like kind of join these meetings and know these people. And they would talk about like how fortunate it was to have funding for buses and for like infrastructure to connect people. One of those leaders in that was Patrisse Cullors, who became one of the leaders of the Black Lives Matter movement. And you can see where I'm
Wow.
going with this, but like that was one of the first
Yeah.
times. Well, that was, the way that I met her and knew of her. And so seeing the impact that she made in the future with BLM and all that stuff, it was really interesting to connect those dots, right?
Yeah.
Um, and even then, I will say she doesn't even know this because I haven't talked to her since, but like that movement made such an impact on me that I have it proudly tattooed on myself. And people have, obviously their issues with the movement and everything, but at the end of the day, Black Lives Matters to me and always will.
People are always going to have an issue with the movement. This is what Brother Malcolm was trying to say, back in the 50s.
Yeah,
They're always going to have an issue with any kind of movement, but the point, like soul to soul, is keep on moving, don't stop.
absolutely. Absolutely. Um, but anyway, back to just my experience and just to give some people some more color about me. So like when I was in New York, I was couch surfing, and then I actually got my apartment in the East Village, basement level apartment, had one window. I mean, it was one of those like really like what a New York apartment is. And
Yeah.
I was working, continued to work in PR and everything, and doing the things I actually wanted to do. And then in 2020, I was laid off again, because of what was going on with the pandemic and everything. And so I decided to move back to LA and live with my family. And actually, at that time, I realized that I can't stop being ambitious. I can't stop working. And so I actually continued to work. I found freelance work, all that stuff. Like I never honestly stopped working, which is an honor for me to say. And I'm very thankful and lucky to be able to say that. But at the same time, I decided to pursue my MBA. So you alluded to me getting that. And then I started the job which I am in currently a month after I started my MBA that same year too. I also just want to highlight that 2020 was such an interesting time because yes, people were dying of a disease that we knew very little about, but also we saw Black people literally dying in front of our faces from the people that we have always been told should be protecting us.
And at
Now,
very,
if
very
you,
high rates. I mean, the rates of Black death during COVID-19 during the pandemic was double the rest of the country in the dominant group. And so that I remember that being an alarming time for leaders, especially me and your dad were in healthcare at that time. And so
yeah,
some of the things that we were experiencing, just being in spaces where it was easier to catch the COVID-19 virus. But that was a scary time.
it was. And I will also say this, if you've been Black for a while, and I've been Black my whole life, you knew that
Me
police
too.
were all already iffy, right? And I'm going back to what I mentioned about Rodney King and all that stuff. But I do think it was a very interesting time because as much as we saw the anger on social media, we read the vitriol, we also saw people actually not only ask for change, but march in the streets for a change. And I wasn't around during this time of the civil rights movement. You already alluded to Martin Luther King. I know your love for Malcolm X. I wasn't there during that time, but I've read about these people. And I don't want to say that I experienced the same thing, but what I will say is that time was so impactful for me. And so as I continued in my own career in corporate America, I've thought about what are the ways that I can connect the dots so I can continue to represent, advocate for underrepresented individuals, some that like may share the same dimensions of differences or some that do not in this environment that I'm in, especially now as we see the changes and frankly, in my opinion, we're moving backwards to the progress that we've seen. So I know that was a long-winded answer, but I hope that gives you
No, but
some
I
context
love
and
it.
color.
First of all, I love a good long answer because there's a lot to unpack in there. And I think what you're talking about, I'm a writer. And so I just heard an entire story arc, which basically led you to what you're doing now. And it really starts in with the beaches. This is the thing that people might not understand about living in Los Angeles. Los Angeles is marketing. Like when you are when you walk around the streets, I mean, it's marketing itself to you. It is a brand on its own. I mean, it lives and it breathes. And you drive down the street, you go from Crenshaw Boulevard, where we used to have the old school cars with the hydraulics, and you have the zoot suits, and you can go down to the beach and you have your Beach Boys, Lana Del Rey sort of culture. It does this thing of, it just naturally markets things. Like, I just take a picture. I was at a park in Inglewood just taking a regular picture, and I'm like, look at all these palm trees behind me. It really sets its own tone. So you go from that, coupled with this experience of being in a city that has had the Watts riots, that has had the Rodney King beating, and all of the aftermath of that, and that continues to have issues with haves and have nots. It has color line issues. There is redlining and housing issues. I mean, you get a little bit of that, well, you get a lot of that social context. And then couple it with the mentors that you've had that have put you in spaces or that have lifted you up so that you can become a corporate leader. That stuff doesn't go away. Your
Yeah.
experiences at CSUN, it doesn't go away. It becomes a part of who you are. That is why Malcolm's story was so important, because he always remembered who Detroit Red was. And even if he was on an international stage, he never forgot what it was like to be down in prison, and the experiences that he had as what some would consider the least of them. And I think that that made his voice louder, and it made it more impactful in the communities when he spoke. Now, so we've gotten you to this place where now you're this big shot. You've been through the highs and lows. You've had jobs, you've lived in different cities, you've been laid off, you've been resilient and come back into spaces. What do you notice as a Black man in these corporate spaces that's unique? What's unique about our or your experiences just being a leader or being in these corporate spaces?
Yeah, such a good question. And I will say, like, listen, I can only speak about my experience. And I am not going to serve as a representative for the place that I work at or a representative for the places that I've worked at.
Right.
But I will say, even within that, even though this is my experience, it's also not a monolith, right? So, like, I don't also want to set that up as I speak for every Black male in America. But what's really interesting, and I will say this, there is always, at least for me, have been a form of bonding to people that look like me and identify like I do. And I want to go back to this point of actually the valley where I was raised because, you know, my parents are very progressive, but have always been in a space where like there hasn't really been a lot of black people. I mean, in the valley for sure. And even when I was in schools and stuff, it was always probably 2%, which is honestly representative of the US. But it was still, you know, ensuring that, frankly, I could code switch, right? Meaning, like, I had to know how to connect with people that look like me, but also know how to connect with people that didn't look like me. And
Yeah.
frankly, sometimes I was the only person that they knew as part of that demographic. When I got to corporate America, sometimes I was still the only representative who looked like me. But I will also say, when I got to a place, this huge corporation, I could see other people that look like me, and we could still be considered maybe a smaller demographic, but I really saw authentic connection between all of us, and I continue that. And I am proud to say that I am a member of the employee resource group for Black people at the company that I'm in,
And
because
I
I
just
think it's
I want to say, like, while you're talking about ERGs, this is a really important model. And this is, like, not every company has this. And I really fight for this all the time. There needs to be employee resource groups at all companies because
yeah.
it's a best practice for one. But, like, you get the opportunity to connect with people in the field, in your space, who have immediate shared experience of working in that space together. And it's a really holistic and safe way to be able to work through some unique issues that it might not be safe to talk about in the team meeting.
100%. And to that point too, like I would just walk in spaces and then people would be like, wait, who are you? Like, oh, we should talk, we should connect. And then we would talk and they would introduce me to another person. That person would introduce me to another person. And then frankly, that same was shared with me. So like I would meet people that just joined the company or organization, right? And then we would continue that. And I think it's especially important when you talk to people that are outside of your core team too, to understand what their experiences are as well. Um, so I think as I've joined corporate America, I've engaged in corporate America, I have seen this this core theme of connection with people who look like you and maybe identify similarly to you. Um, I would also say, so that's on like I would say the internal front. The other thing I would say too is I do think it's important to take your lived experiences with you. And while
Mm,
I don't want to put the burden on anyone to be the representative for everyone that they may identify with, I do think if you feel empowered to do so, talk about ways that you can really vouch for people who may look like you or that don't look like you. Like for me, another example is how do I talk about people that are differently able than I am, right? Like what does ability look like in the work that I do? Especially the people that I'm trying to talk to through my work. It's an important segment, and I don't identify with that, but let me do the work to learn about that. Tying it back to us, because of our lived experiences, I do think we need to lean into our expertise a little bit, and not to say again that we represent everyone, but just to say, hey, because of what I've experienced in my history and my past, I think X, Y, Z. Do we have the opportunity to validate that, test that? I think that is super important as well.
so you're saying that part of what we should be thinking about doing is lifting up others with different lived experiences, whether it's the same as ours, or you're talking about people with disabilities, or people experiencing different communities like the LGBT plus community. And I think that that is revolutionary in and of itself, because it takes leaders out of this self focus,
Yeah.
into a really, it's a servant leadership model to think I'm going to speak, and I'm going to lift up and um, amplify the voices of people who are in need. The people that have differences that may not be immediately recognized or poured into. And so when I think that's it's very authentic to your experience, your background. And when I think about one of the things that we have to go through in spaces, and I'm sure that anybody who comes from a marginalized community or a community that's historically othered, um, the question might be, well, how do I maintain my authenticity in these spaces? I've been in situations where I was asked, well, they didn't really ask me because they're not that bold, but have made suggestions about, well, maybe you shouldn't wear Jordans with your suits, or maybe you shouldn't, wear this T-shirt, or you should talk more properly. And it's like, yeah, I have a doctorate, but I'm also going to throw in Black vernacular English because that's who I am. And that is my right to be able to connect with my community as well and to show up as who I am. So I wonder, from your
Yeah.
perspective, when we talk about authenticity, do you have any ideas about how we can maintain that in these spaces?
Yeah. Well, as you were speaking and to your personal example, what I think is important from that is it is good to know what other people are thinking, but that doesn't mean we need to take that and just apply it to our lives. I think what we should be doing is understanding how people view us and take that consideration and ensure that we have a clear view of ourselves too and what we
Mm,
want to display and portray. Um, I would say what's important to me, and yes, navigating through my own career, people have said things to me off the cuff, very directly, whatever. And it goes back to this idea of code switching too. What does that mean? And how do I really show up in a way? But,
are we still code
you know,
switching? Is
well,
that we're
here's the
still doing it
thing.
today, huh?
You know what? You sometimes you have to. At least in my this is my own opinion. I think you sometimes still gotta have to, right? And maybe I'm just taking it with me because of my days being in the valley, probably being the only Black person in class, whatever. But
Sometimes it
I
is
think,
safety. It can be
yeah,
safety. It can be
yeah.
security.
It's safety, security, but it's also communication because if people can't receive your message, then you have to really explore how you are communicating it. And sometimes that is the beauty of code switching. Now, I do want to say, I do think you need to be authentic in what you are saying. I don't think code switching means that you are saying things that are going that you don't believe in. But I do think it is about, okay, the way you may communicate it. And obviously, that model will change over time, especially as people get to know you. I will be honest, I probably do probably less code switching on my social media, and I invite more and more people on my social media. I think your question, I would say to me, really just reminds me that as I walk into spaces, I'm always looking to see what's up, how are people like acting, reacting, what does that look like, and then how do I continue to push that a little bit so I can show up in the way that I want to, in a way that I know that I won't probably get fired the next day because I still gotta
Right.
make money at the end of the day, right? So, what does that look like for me? Um, and thankfully, I've been in spaces where I do feel like I could be more and more of my authentic self. And I will say right now, and maybe it's just a reflection of the organization that I'm in, I do feel like I am still able to be the person that I want to be seen as. Um, and still say and act the way that I would normally. And I really do. I mean, I don't want this to just be like, I love my company, but I do want to just give props to the people that I get to work with on a daily basis for allowing me to feel that way because I know that is not a shared experience.
It definitely is not. And I love that you lift up people, because a lot of times when we talk about companies, we see them as their company brand, but we forget that there are people and experiences within a company. I've personally experienced that where, in allegedly in some of the positions that I've had, the relationship of the organization to the community might not have been in alignment with my values all the time, but in an area that I worked in, our values were strong and we were able to make some impact that I think was really important, and that was moral, and that was, filling, and it was because of the people there. And so that's another thing that I'm taking from you, is that people matter. You talked about your mentors, you're talking about
Mhm.
your coworkers, and I think that that's a survival point for leaders of color, for Black leaders, is who's around you, who's in your corner. You might not be able to go into the larger team meeting or the boardroom and speak that way, but there is a space where you can, and you can do that in the employee resource group. So I love hearing that. Now, the thing that I think listeners would definitely agree with is that there's an emotional toll that comes with staying true to your values when we talk about authenticity, when we talk about being in these spaces.
Yep.
And it makes me think that I've experienced hearing a lot about self-care. I've experienced hearing a lot about, this is ways that you can stay well, and download the Calm app and everything will be fine at work for you. Or just take a walk, or, take a break every 5 minutes, a 5 minute break every meeting, and, just do some breathing exercises. And it always irritates me because I'm like, I don't know if it's that simple. I wonder for you, how do you wrestle with wellness as a leader at all?
Yeah, that's another great question, and I also want to be clear on something. As much as I code switch, I have always had an attitude. My dad will say that to you. Like I just, and you could see it on my
Wait, what do
face.
you mean attitude? Like, okay, we need to unpack
Oh,
this real quick.
you okay? So that is a very charged word, I will say, and like it comes with a lot of weight and gravitas. But people aren't lying when I will look at something a certain way. I will have a certain look on my face as people are describing something. Um, and especially if it's something that I think is so out of left field. I want to do some learning. I think it used to be a lot quicker in my reaction because I wasn't understanding or
Yeah,
something, and I had to do some reflection. But
same.
still, sometimes people come out of left field. Now, your question, though, like your question was, how do I deal with some of this, and how do I deal with the stress
How do you
and all of
stay
that?
well? Like, how do you,
Yeah,
when all of this is
yeah,
going on and then you're ready to pop off? Because I have
yeah.
that same pop off spirit from back in the day. People who knew me 20 years ago in this industry, they're like, why is he so calm now? Like, he talks so slow and just, that's
Yeah.
who is this James B. Golden? It's like, this is somebody who has not matured, but just been through and has learned what to fight for and when to fight.
You just said it, which is the long term. I think we need to do some work in ourselves, right? And like, what is mental health look like to us? Like, how do we ask ourselves key questions that will help us think about life and see life from a different perspective? Maybe I think is key. But the other thing too is the prioritization, which I was also going to say because you said that. What is important to me right now? Because at the end of the day, like I already mentioned, I'm working at the place that I'm working for a paycheck. That's what I agreed to. That's what I signed the dotted line for. Like we are all in alignment for that. What I don't want to jeopardize that for the moment, or maybe I do, depending on what is also important to me. And I would say like no one's also going to devalue me. No one's going to make me feel less than. No one is going to threaten me, the people that I love, and get away with it. There's another thing I want to mention too here, which I think is key. And I do want to talk about this a little bit more too, but this idea of capitalism and what that means. Because
Okay, you might be
Our
trying to get me
ancestors,
canceled today, but let's go with it
well,
'cause I love it.
here's what I will say, and I have a few thoughts on this. But and let's be very clear, like as we're filming this is the day after blackout, right? So like I want to be clear in how we're contextualizing all of this.
And Khalil, can you just talk a little bit about what blackout was for people who may
Yeah.
not, know?
Yes, absolutely. So and you could please feel free to supplement because I know what I know, but here's what I will say. Obviously, there's been a charge, a call for accountability and action from underrepresented individuals, and specifically in the spaces that I'm looking at, Black individuals, to not engage in, I would say, brands, corporations, whatever, that don't support us, all throughout the month of February, but specifically on the last day of February. And my understanding is to really show the value and the worth that our dollar has. Would you add anything else to that?
Yeah. So I think that this is part of a long trajectory, and here comes Brother Malcolm again and Martin. But the Montgomery bus boycotts was actually it was a financial movement, and so a lot of people will say, "Oh, well, it was about the right to be able to sit anywhere you want to on the bus." So that is part of it, but it was about hitting the Montgomery system with understanding that Black people are the ones who ride this bus a lot of times, and we spend a lot of money here. And if we can't be treated with respect and dignity when we walk on these buses, then we will not be on them, and you will not benefit from our dollar. And so I think we learned early on that in a capitalist structure like America, that one way to impact and to have voice and to say we don't agree with this, with these decisions, with what's happening, with what's coming forward, and how we're being treated, is through the power of our dollar. And there's a few people that I would suggest people who watch this go and really digest information from. And I think you want to make sure that when you are engaging with a Black struggle, with the struggles of the community, that we really do know what's happening, and to know that during this blackout, it was really about I'm not going to spend any money, and that we're going to have a voice to be able to say, go ahead and run your books now and let us know what it was like. I was going to say Joy Reid, unfortunately, she was just let go of. And I think that Tamron has done some work on social media. I think if you go on my page, if you go on Keith's page, Mark Lamont Hill, you'll be able to see some really great stuff for people who are watching about the impacts of this moment. But it's collective, and so that's interesting because now we're talking about capitalism, and I do wonder from you, um, how do we survive? How do we, move
Yeah.
about knowing that we're in a capitalist country, and that's sort of the framework that we live within?
Well, that's actually such a good segue because what I was also going to get to is this idea of, capitalism and this framework. When my ancestors were brought to this country, the enslaved people from the transatlantic slave trade, and what I don't know is like, yes, they were bought. I don't know if they were sold by the other Africans that were there, if they were just stolen. However, they did end up in this framework of capitalism, which actually set the groundwork for what capitalism is today, because my ancestors were on the ground, and helping the economy of what we now know is
Um,
of America today. And I want to just say, to go back to what I was trying to say before and to finish my point, it's important for us to recognize what it means to be bought. because I don't
Wow.
want to be bought. And so I will also say, as I support myself, what are the lines and limitations? Because I'm not just going to sit here and collect a paycheck for anything. I'm going to make it very clear what I do stand up for and what I don't stand up for. Um, so I will say that, and in that period there, going back to your question about capitalism, what we should do. So yes, like, you know, capitalism exists, and if capitalism is going to be the constant within this equation, then we need to make capitalism work for us. So that means first, support brands, companies that have like minded values as we do. I would say the second thing is working in these corporations that share these like minded values as well, because we also have to acknowledge we do have to work in capitalism. And honestly, we should be working for the people that are going to help support us in our culture, the people that look like us at the end of the day. And I think
Okay.
thirdly
And how do we
too,
know who they are? Because there's a lot of people out
well,
here, and let me just. Oh my god, I don't want to say it. This is the thing. I love Beyonce. I've been a Beyonce fan since 1996. Beyonce, we don't got it. We don't. We don't have it like
well,
that. And the tickets are $2,000, and I'm like, I want to be at
yeah,
the Carter concert, but then it's
yeah.
like it feels like I don't know. Sometimes it feels like it's too much stuff that's being sold, and it's like I want to support. It's a liquor, and then it's this, and it's clothing, and it's all this, which I love. But I wonder, how do we really know who to support?
Well,
We
I
only
think
have
it's, I
so
think,
much money as
yeah.
people, so we're how do we do that?
Well, let's just talk about this underlying theme, which has been this whole conversation about intention and intentionality, right? Like, be intentional with where you spend your dollar. And that honestly means don't just buy everything and anything because it exists.
Okay.
Try to do as much research as you can. Now, you're also getting at the question, even when I do the research, I'm not really understanding how people are moving, which is a good point. Here's what I will say: companies will always chase the dollar. So while I think it is important for us to do our research and to support companies that we think are in line with us, also make sure that you are being vocal on social media and calling for action or something about places that you spend your money. What's not going to work is you calling for action for a company that you don't spend money at. Why are they going to care if you're not spending their money, right? It is a bit of a balance. And frankly, this is where I tie it back to the fact that like my ancestors were brought here and did have couldn't help build, shift, pivot this like this overlying ecosystem of capitalism. So with that, we have to work within the framework. And this is the thing that we have to do, in my opinion.
I love that. I love that. And as we talk about being intentional, I think also when we're in these spaces in these corporate systems, it's about being intentional with our leadership, and not just our authenticity, not just what we buy, what we do, who we're with, but how our leadership is going to make a change or make a difference in that system. And I think I wonder, from your perspective, how do you from within lead in a way that is going to either challenge the systems that are oppressive, or that's going to heal systems that are broken, or that's going to
Mm.
feed into something that will lift up people who look like you that are coming behind you in these spaces.
I think, and this is going back to the title of this episode about the word dismantling. And I have to question that for myself if I'm really dismantling anything or if I'm just taking space and presence,
Hmm.
right? Because all that I can do is show up as myself, advocate for myself and people that I think need to have advocates. And whatever the group decides, they can decide. But also, when you go back to your question about how do I ensure that I am just not, um, I would say, overextending myself, that is
Mm,
how. I need to recognize that all I can control is the way that I show up, the way that I can communicate, and the way that I represent myself. People can do with that whatever they will, and I will continue to do that. And hopefully, somebody can recognize that, right? And this is the other part about how we communicate ourselves to people who don't look like us, because maybe I'm a Sagittarius, I'm an optimist. I think there is good in the world, and I've been so grateful and lucky that there have been people who don't identify the same way I do, but who have been advocates for me.
yeah.
And with that, because of that, I think they've been able to connect with me because of the way that I've communicated with them, right? So, all that to say, I think what we can continue to do as leaders, BIPOC individuals, specifically Black leaders, is to continue to show up in spaces, be clear, be transparent, be honest, and also be intentional with everything that we do and ask the same in return from the people that are in that space.
Wow, I love that, and I'm definitely taking from that is speaking into my spirit, and I think it'll speak into a lot of people's spirits that are needing to remember that what comes from us internally is what will actually be a change, and that's good enough. Like we don't have to be killed, or we don't have to be a martyr to really make a change. Like sometimes just being there and having good values and communicating well and treating people with respect is its own form of resistance. And um, I love hearing that. Okay, so what's next for you? Where do you go from here? You've done all of this now. What's next for Kahlil?
Well, before I answer that, I do want to say one thing too about community, because you had alluded to this, but I will also want people to know, and this is my own opinion, but I don't, because Black people are not a monolith, I do think it's going to be near impossible to get all Black people around something, around one specific goal. What I think that we should do instead is focus on ourselves and the people that we talk to, our communities, our close communities, right? Because change does start from within, like you said. And the more and more people that we can just get aligned with, that will drive change. So instead of us looking at this microcosm, let's focus on the here and now, what I am doing, what my friends are doing, and how can we continue that? Because I also think that will help lessen some of that feeling of like, this is an uphill battle, because it is. It is an uphill battle, and I think we all know that. But there's still some change that we can drive, even at this self level, that I think is important.
I
I would
love that.
say,
And that's a
thank
core
you.
piece of servant leadership is
Yeah,
work on yourself and then let that be the change. And that's how
yeah,
I've lived my life is let me
yeah,
spend time, stop not being as reactive so that I can be heard and people will look to the work that I'm doing and say, I want to be like that, or I respect him for being able to be in that space and not go off on somebody.
totally. And so to answer your question about what's next for me, here's what I would say for myself. My goal has always to like create something that really not only represents underrepresented individuals, but advocates for them and also brings them equity. So as I think about my next step, I'm thinking about how do I build infrastructure to continue this idea of equity. And I'm talking about equity, let me be specific. I'm talking about money. I'm talking about financial implication. I'm talking about how do I get those that money from the top to actually stream down. Because as we see in this administration, they're really trying to cut that like as much as possible. And I'm going to be that needle in this umbrella that they have to keep poking holes through, because I do want to see that that money continue to funnel to my community. And I'm talking about physical community. I'm talking about culture. I'm talking about art. Like, it is so important to me. That is what's next for me. So
I love
hopefully the
that.
next time you see me, it will be through Kahlil Spurlock Enterprises. Let's just say that.
I love that. And so, shout out to the Malcolm X within you. Continue to poke those holes. And you're right. We need to be able to pour into the communities that are in need. And we've seen it in healthcare where so much of our funding has just within the last couple of months has been erased and moved. And it's like, well, you can't talk about diversity anymore. You can't talk about this or that. And that's why they call me the bad boy of healthcare, because I am the one who will. But I love that you still, in even in your role and in the work that you do, you're able to continue to be an activist and to make sure that communities are taken care of. We need more leaders like you in this world, and I'm just really grateful to have met you, and that you've had incredible parents and a family that I've met that I know have really poured into you. This is the kind of light that we need in our world. And I'm hoping that one day we can get you back on and you can talk about some of those holes you're poking in the umbrellas.
Absolutely. I would love to. I can't wait. And thank you so much, Doctor, for having me. This has been a great conversation and really invigorating one,
I
honestly.
think so. I think this is a really good conversation. All right, Kahlil, take care. Thank you for coming on Golden Light. And let me just say this. So, I had to write down several different things while Kahlil was talking. I think that what stood out to me was this idea of how we are raised, how we are nurtured and mentored, whether it's our environment, our families, our mentors, how it continues to build into this person that we become and this leader that we become. And we become a little bit more refined. We learn how to not pop off on people, but we never lose that initial, that little kid that grew up in the San Fernando Valley, or that LA kid that looked at the palm trees and the beaches. And sometimes that pushes us to be even better. And so leadership isn't about fitting into broken systems, it's about creating your own system and reflecting the type of leaders that we need to see in the world. And so that's really inspiring to me. It's exciting. I know it's hard for Black leaders in particular in corporate America, but there are some things we can do to lift each other up, to lift ourselves up, to be well, to be whole, to be servants of the community. So I want to encourage you guys, follow Kahlil on social media, on LinkedIn, on Instagram, and stay connected to his work with brand leadership, but also some of the work that he's getting ready to do in helping us to get some of our money back and monetarily lift up our communities. I want you to watch and share this episode on LinkedIn, on YouTube, on Instagram and Threads, wherever you are. And remember, in the words of Flavor Flav and the guys of Public Enemy, power to the people, no delay, make everybody see in order to fight the powers that be. Sometimes those powers are within ourselves. And if we fight to be better, we're going to be okay. We don't just need more Black and brown faces in corporate America. We need power in the decisions that shape the world that we seek. Be incredible, be bold, be unflinching, but most importantly, be healed. I'll see you guys next week. It's been a great show.